All right, and we're going to go ahead and get it started on our meeting today. Today is our October quarterly liaison meeting. And for our agenda today, we wanted to go over some new resources that have either been created or discovered since the last time we got together, and make sure that we share all of those and have some discussion about where those might apply. We have some new data to look at, and I wanted to look at that data in relation to one of the presentations that was from the Special Populations Conference. I'm not sure if anyone was able to attend that, but there were some really great sessions and some really great sessions on McKinney-Vento and homelessness. So we're going to spend a little bit of time looking over that and having some conversations around that. Rachel has an update on funding and budgets and things that we can do with money, and she's going to go over that stuff, and then we'll end with a little bit of a roundtable to see if there's any conversation topics that anybody wants to address today or something that we can address between now and our next meeting. So just kind of getting right into the new resources. The last time we got together, we were talking about tracking our homeless students, and we identified that homeless data tracker through the MV grant reporting was an option at the time. And we were also thinking, was there a different way that we might collect that data? And Rachel and I were going to follow up with MDE about and talking through a few different options. And after talking to Michelle Williams at MDE, Rachel and I really feel that the homeless data tracker is still going to be the best way to go for now. That may change in the future, but for now, the homeless data tracker is going to be the way that for our county, we want to consistently collect the data. And it's really used for two things. One, it can be used internally to track your homeless students and their needs and the services that you're providing. Also, how you might be spending any funding for them. And then the other thing that it's for is we can actually use the data that you're putting in to complete our grant reporting requirements. And that is also a very important situation for it, because otherwise we have to come back to all of you and try to bug you for numbers. And so if we're entering all of the data into the homeless data tracker, you'll be able to use it locally for your own purposes, and then collectively we'll all be able to use that to complete our reporting requirements so that we can continue to get our funding. So when we had the last meeting, one of the things that came up was I believe, I can't remember who asked for it, but was saying, hey, sometimes I do the intake with students, and then I would like someone else at the district, maybe an office staff member, to be able to enter those into the homeless data tracker. And were there any resources that showed how to do that? And we didn't have that at the time. So I talked to Pam, who is our, I think, resident expert on the homeless data tracker. And nice, she just shook her head, and so Pam and I, mostly Pam, made a quick video. It's just 8 minutes long, so it's a very short and reasonable amount of time. And that you could either watch for yourself to maybe get a couple of pointers if you haven't used it before, or even if you have, because I know that there's a few sections in there that even as Pam and I were looking at it, we learned kind of by doing a few new things in there. So just a very short video that you can watch, or if you are in the position to maybe have an office staff member or someone else enter the data for you, you can show them that video and they should be pretty well equipped to enter the data. It's a pretty straightforward process, and the video goes over exactly how to enter it. To accompany the video, there is an intake form that goes line for line about what is in the tracker and in the right order. So a very, very handy piece. So a typical identification situation might be some family enrolls, they fill out the home language survey, the office staff notes that there's a concern, they get a hold of you, and then you contact the family to talk things through with them. You can actually just fill out this intake form, and then that way you wouldn't have to be necessarily trying to click through and enter all the buttons. You can just fill the intake form out, and then later you can enter it into the tracker, or you could possibly give it to an office staff member or something like that they could enter it for you. So this intake form is super handy. And like I said, it's exactly what's in the tracker, and in exactly the right order so that it makes it really easy for data entry. And I thought those two things together, the video and then the intake form, hopefully will give some guidance and some support to be able to enter that information into the tracker. One, if you've done it before, maybe you didn't have this intake form before. And then if you haven't used the tracker before, it's time to start using it and getting the information in. It will be helpful on your end. And like I mentioned, it'll be helpful on the grant reporting side, which is also helpful on your end because if we won't be bugging you for numbers. So I'm going to pause there and see if Pam had anything to add to what I just talked about, and then to see if anybody had any questions about the data tracker itself.
The only thing I would say, I wasn't sure last meeting, so you probably talked about it, but we have an actual questionnaire that every single family fills out at enrollment and also fills out anytime they change addresses. But we don't do the intake form on everyone because we only do that on the people that the questionnaire says they're homeless. So I think we've already shared that other form. So that one's for everybody. This one in particular is just if you need to enter into the system, it'll make your life so much easier. Like Dave said, it goes right with the data collector. So you just go right down. It's like boom, 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 boom. Real simple.
Thanks, Pam. Yes, the intake form is certainly just for those people that you want to get entered into the system, not for everybody. I was going to say the home language survey. The residency questionnaire is the thing that everybody gets, right?
Can I ask a question, Dave?
Absolutely.
So I noticed on the intake form, there was a yes, no box there for foster care. And I know that sometimes homeless and foster care are intertwined and sometimes they're separate. And that's kind of, for me, a little blurry. And I'm not sure, like, should we be doing this process for foster care students also? What's that?
Rachel, you think you want to take a crack at that one?
Yeah, I can try. So there was more recent legislation that was passed that separated foster students from McKinney-Vento students. So foster students are primarily handled through DHHS, and McKinney-Vento students, services and supports can be handled through the school and referrals can be made. With foster students, there isn't the same kinds of rights and protections that would be afforded under homeless circumstances, such as transportation and like the right to immediate enrollment. Those kinds of things are particular just to students experiencing homelessness. And for foster care students, they categorize them a little bit differently according to the law now.
What else would anybody else have to add about that?
I just sent a chat to you, Dave. So that intake form, we created that when foster care was still part of McKinney-Vento. But this is our form to tweak, so we could actually take it off if people wanted to. So it doesn't hurt to know, you know, but.
So Laura, does that make it as clear as mud?
Right. So I'm only using this form for homeless students, and I happen to be marking whether or not they're in foster care, but they must first be homeless for this form to take effect. That's what I'm getting.
Wow, that was like the most succinct answer I've ever heard to that. Yes, I think that's really good. Yeah, I think that kind of hits the nail right on the head.
Do we need any special permission to be able to put the kids into the homeless data tracker? Like, do they have to know like who we are or have any list of who's putting it in?
So are you talking about do the parents have to know?
No, does the state need to know like who's putting it in?
Oh, gotcha. Not to my knowledge. Rachel handles making the logins for that. So, you know, whether it's one of us or if there's, you know, an office staff member or something that needs to add that, we can get those people added.
Okay.
All right. If anything else comes up about this, feel free to throw it in chat or bring it up at the round table. But this was the first resource that we wanted to talk about. And for most of us, I think that this is not something new. We've been using this system to enter our homeless students. If it is new, then feel free to follow up with either me or Rachel. And if you need a login, Rachel is the place to go for that. In the video, we'll get you started. This is not a complicated system. So the thing that makes it really easy is using this intake form that was created by our Head Start program. Okay, so a few other resources to talk about. I believe we emailed out the front office staff 101 video and checklist. And so I just linked those again in case anybody hasn't seen those. But if you haven't seen those or haven't shared those with your front office staff, it's a very short video with a checklist on it, but I think it would go a long way to helping with identification. We know that the front office staff is really the hub of how all of this happens. And if they're the ones that are going to notify you that somebody came in that, you know, whether it's through the home language survey, I just said home language survey again, whether it's through the residency questionnaire or through conversations with staff or conversations with families, they're really they're the place that you're going to get the most bang for your buck. So I think that this short video is going to be really helpful to them. The checklist is there to try to check on some systems things so that everybody knows what to do from there. So I highly recommend using that video if you have not done so already. So there were also some requests that came in from our last meeting about what kind of training can we do with the building staff, because obviously the front office staff can't know everything either. And it's often going to be the teachers that are interacting with the kids or the families, and they're the ones that are going to hear different things, teachers or service providers. And so there was a request about, hey, could we maybe kind of do something like that front office staff, but for full staff training. And so we talked about this with our MAISD group, and Kristen Shepard is the liaison for Wesley. And she used the video that we have linked here that actually comes from the training site. And it's about 20 minutes long. So I don't know that you would want to use the whole thing, but you might pull snippets out of it. And it's about these students that go in, and it's actually told from some students' point of view, which is kind of interesting. And they, at the beginning, they talk about what their perceptions are of what it means to be homeless. You know, so they're like, oh, you're living in a cardboard box, or, you know, these sorts of things. And then they actually interview people that are experiencing homelessness, from young kids to adults. And then they do like a day in a life kind of thing. It's pretty interesting. I would say that it looks like it was just made by a school. So it's not like high production value, but it's actually pretty interesting. And it might be worth going through and pulling out maybe a few minutes of that here and there and using that to train staff. It might be a little better than me making a video droning on about a list of things to look for. So I'd suggest maybe taking a look at the video, seeing if there's some sections of it that you can pull out that you might want to use with staff. And then if you do make something from this video, you know, if you watch it, you're like, oh, I really liked minutes 10 through 15 or something like that. If you could share that back with me and Rachel, so then we could maybe put a little study guide together for it. But instead of us trying to say, oh, this would be good, maybe hearing from everybody else, you know, what was beneficial, and then we can put something together to kind of put out. So we're kind of wanted to just share that as a resource and see if anybody might take us up on actually using that. And then if that was effective with the staff, and if not, we can continue to think about what resources we might be able to make internally. Has anybody had a chance to use that front office staff with their office staff? And if so, not to put anybody on the spot, so let me reword that. Would anyone like to share if you did? And if you didn't, that's okay. But if somebody did share that and had a good experience, would you like to share about it? Or even feedback about it? This is my teacher wait time.
I did, Dave, and with our front end people, and they found it helpful. Any additional information or reminder of what to look for and how to handle situations is always a good refresher for them. So it's definitely helpful.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Carrie. All right, we will go ahead and move on here. So there's going to be a few slides that I want to share, and I think that it's going to be sort of a little bit of preaching to the choir for this group, but I wanted to share these slides. I thought they were really great from the Special Pops Conference, and also to say that you're welcome to use any of these slides in anything that you're doing, whether it's with staff or if you're trying to talk to administration or anything like that about students experiencing homelessness. And I thought that this presentation was really great. It was done from a research study, and I have that study linked in our dashboard. But it was a research study that was done in Michigan. So this is all about Michigan. So it's not like, I mean, it really kind of hits close to home when it's talking about Michigan. And what I'm sharing is just a small portion of the data that they had, but I thought some of the ones that kind of stood out to me. So this first one is all about the percent of students that transfer mid-year. And so the average of students to transfer mid-year, there's 7% of students across the state, no matter what their situation, are going to transfer schools mid-year at some point. And then it goes in to say, what about if they're not economically disadvantaged and never homeless? So only 5% of those students are going to do it. And then it goes up through economically disadvantaged, never homeless, formerly homeless, and then currently homeless. And so you can see that obviously if they're homeless, then they're going to be transferring schools more. And this kind of really gets at that main intent and purpose of McKinney-Vento, is we want to try to make a stable educational environment for the students. And so despite all of the work of McKinney-Vento and those sorts of things, we're still getting 20% of the kids that are currently homeless are still transferring schools. And you'll see the impact of that here in a few other slides, but I just thought this one was pretty telling. And what you're going to also consistently see is this piece of economically disadvantaged, never homeless, also being more at risk for all of these risk factors. And we'll talk about why that's important here in a minute. I think the other thing to point out on this slide is it's also disproportional across race. So you can look through to see the disproportionality across race as well. So for this one is it connects those same categories to missing school. And so the state definition of chronic absenteeism is that the student missed 10% or more of the school days. So there was an older formula where it was 10 days or more. The new formula is 10% or more of the days. And you can see here that the average for Michigan is that 20% of the students meet this definition of chronic absenteeism. And then again, you can see where our economically disadvantaged, even if they've never been homeless, are significantly missing significantly more school. And then we have our formerly homeless students and our currently homeless students. They're transferring schools, and then they're having more chronic absenteeism. Again, I know that this is probably not like, oh my gosh, I would have never thought that would be the case. But I think this is kind of building the case for something that I want to talk about. And again, you can use these slides for other purposes if it's helpful for you. And then we get into discipline. Students that either formerly experienced homelessness or are currently experiencing it are definitely more at risk to be suspended or expelled. And our race is also a factor in this, as we've seen in other studies. So they basically, in this bullet here, they say there's this strong intersection between race, economic security, and housing stability for if a student is going to have disciplinary issues. And I thought that this part here was interesting too, that association persisted even after the stable housing was found, right? So now they've found some stable housing and are still finding that we have more economic more disciplinary situations. And this one is about proficiency. So we can see that if you were not academically disadvantaged and never homeless, that you're significantly above average for students in the state for how you'd score in reading and math. And our homeless students score even significantly far below economically disadvantaged students. And you can see that persistent piece that they talked about in another piece, that if students, even after they find that stable housing, still find it difficult to hit those student achievement goals for the state. And I thought that this one was particularly telling. So this was about our graduation rate. And so in Michigan, we have about 81% of the students graduate within 4 years. And just to look across this piece here, and so they talk about if they were homeless in middle school, but never homeless in high school, they basically have the same significantly lower graduation rate than students that were homeless during high school. So, so even if they were homeless in middle school and then were able to secure that stable housing, there's just this really long-term impact of those other factors. They probably received more student discipline, which means that they were probably suspended or expelled from school. They missed more school because of their housing instability. They had to transfer schools. So those factors, even if they get those if they're able to get stable housing for high school, continue to persist through. And so I just think that piece is just so incredibly important to recognize that this is a very significant, has a very significant impact on the students in all aspects of their education, and that we need to continue this advocacy, and that the positions that all of you have as liaisons are really important in that whole thing. So that was the last piece of data and that I wanted to share, but I kind of pulled this quote. I can't remember if it was from the actual study or from the speaker, but basically what they're saying is if we don't identify the students, well, the direct quote, we deny the students their rights under McKinney-Vento when we under-identify them. And so that really started to get me thinking about our identification here in Muskegon County. And so what this study found is that if they looked at just the economically disadvantaged students, and if you remember from all the slides that we just looked at, those economically disadvantaged students were really butting right up with our homeless students as far as showing the challenges that they were having. But the study found that if you look at just your economically disadvantaged population, so those are students that get free or reduced lunch. That's Michigan's definition for economically disadvantaged. If you look at just them, if you are identifying 10% or more of your economically disadvantaged students as homeless, then you're probably identifying about the right amount of students. So this is a statewide study done in Michigan. If you're identifying between 5 and 10% of your economically disadvantaged students, you're probably missing some students. And then if you are identifying less than 5%, then you are for sure under identifying. Okay, so if you're under 5%, you're for sure under 5% of economically disadvantaged students. They're not saying that you should have 5% of your students are homeless. They're saying that you should be identifying over 5, but probably over 10% of your economically disadvantaged students. So this shows for all of the schools across Michigan, 67% of the schools are very likely under identifying. So there are 67% of the schools across the state are identifying less than 5% of their economically disadvantaged students. And then 21% of the schools are probably or likely under identifying. Only 12% of the schools are not suspected of under identification. So anybody want to take a guess about how Muskegon County does? Do you think we're better than the state? Give a thumbs up. If you think that we're worse than the state, give a thumbs down. If you think we're about at the state, give a sideways thumb. I'm seeing thumbs up. I'm seeing some sideways, and I saw some thumbs down. Okay. So here is for Muskegon County Schools. So 97% of our schools are in that very likely under-identifying homeless students. And we only had 2 schools that identified over 10%. And that was Holton's Virtual Academy and Duck Creek Alternative Ed. So those were the only 2 schools in the whole county that identified more than 10%. And in fact, the only 2 in the county that identified more than 5% of their economically disadvantaged students. So nobody was in this middle part of, well, you might be hitting it all, but maybe not. So just so everybody knows where that came from. So as a county, as of yesterday, so I pulled this data yesterday out of Power School. I went into every single Power School in the county and pulled this data out. And we identified 1.23% of our economically disadvantaged students as homeless. And so just to know how that data is a little delimited, is that's K-12 LEAs and Muskegon Heights. So it doesn't have our charter schools in there, and it doesn't have our preschool in there. And the reason behind that is because I don't have access to those Power Schools. So it's not like I was trying to leave anybody out, but I did not have access to those preschool or to those Power Schools. So this is what I did have access to. So the year that they did this study, they pulled the 17-18 data. And that year, our county identified 4.5% of our economically disadvantaged students as homeless. So we could even say, oh, this is kind of a weird year. We're just all coming off of COVID and those sorts of things. But even before COVID or anything like that hit, our county, I still would have identified in that red. We didn't identify 5% of the students. I go back to the quote from there about that we're really denying the students their right under McKinney-Vento when we under-identify. And then also to think about the data that we just looked at. If we're under-identifying, then kids are moving. If we're under-identifying, then we're not talking to our principals or to other people about the sort of discipline that they might be getting. If we're under-identifying, then we're not talking to families or those sorts of things about truancy and what being out of school means for them. We're not providing them resources to try to be in school more. So I think that this under-identification piece is pretty significant for our county. Again, this data isn't just somebody made it up. This was a study in Michigan about Michigan schools, and it's very recent. So I do recommend that everybody takes a look at the study. It's pretty interesting, and there's a lot more. There's a lot more graphs and things like that in it that are just as interesting as the ones I chose. I just tried to cherry pick a few that were that kind of jumped out at me. So I wanted to pause here and just kind of open it up for a little bit of conversation. I don't know what questions I can ask about the study, but if anybody had any questions or just any thoughts, I wanted to pause and just give a chance to have just an open conversation about that information that we just looked at. And I'm actually going to pause the recording at this point.
All right. So the McKinney-Vento base funding and first ARP distribution final allocations have been released. So it's really exciting because we've been waiting on that since May. So they're here now, and we're figuring out all of those budget pieces right now since all of that information has just been released. Each district is going to be receiving funding based on your highest identified count, either between the years 1920 or 2021. And the next slide is going to go over what some of those numbers are. Right now, we're planning on around $43 per pupil that's going to be in funding for each district. And that's from the ISD in this first distribution. And then if you recall from our other meeting as well, there's a second distribution that's going to come out that's going straight to the LEAs. We don't have information about when that's going to be released just yet, but we do have this. So there is some numbers that we have available that will be coming out. So my plan right now is to send that total allocation to each of your districts individually. In the agenda, I linked our contact list for the county of each liaison that represents each district. And there's another column on there for your business office contact. So if you could go in there, please, and put in who I should be linking this information to, because that person will have contact with as far as receiving documentation and invoices and all of that kind of stuff. We'll probably go through that person that you work with. So when you have a moment, if you could fill that out, that would be really helpful. And sometime in the next couple of days, I'm planning on getting each of those amounts to each of you and copying that business person as well. Also in the agenda is the reimbursement procedures and allowable expenses. And in that, it just kind of goes over some of the expectations as far as what we'll need for documentation. So any receipts, packing slips, any information that shows directly what the expenses are. And there will also be a reimbursement form that can be filled out, just going over what some of those expenses were that you may have had, and then totaling that amount and just making sure that that matches up with the receipts. And those can be emailed over to me. Right now I'm planning on that being a quarterly thing. So I put some dates in the agenda as well. I'm thinking the first request for invoices will be mid-December, and then March, and then we'll have another one at the end of the year. So these amounts can also be backdated to July 1st. So I know I've talked to a few of you in the last couple months about some things that have needed to be purchased, and I said to go ahead and purchase those in most instances. So if those receipts are available, those are all things that you can be reimbursed for as well. So just making sure that all of that's together. It's in an easily understandable format so that if an auditor were to review it, they know exactly what each receipt was linking to, and that everything totals out. If you have any questions about that, or if you have any questions about if something is allowable or not, feel free to send that to me anytime, and we can review that. If it's something that is kind of out of the box, even, I can always ask MDE and get their approval first and send it over to you. So that's really exciting. Again, the allowable expenses are in the agenda, and those are things that can be used for the immediate needs of any kids that are experiencing homelessness in your district. So I've heard about a few kids in some districts that were in need of sleeping bags, that were in need of blankets, that were in need of pillows. All of that stuff is allowable. And that brings me to our next bullet there about the Walmart charity gift card. This is something that I just found out about from Kent ISD. So Walmart has a charity gift card, and I was going to link it in there and I forgot, so I'll link it in the agenda, which excludes the purchases of alcohol, lottery, firearms, and nicotine. And these can be purchased by the district, keeping in mind that the district is going to retain all risk in that purchase. So they can be purchased by the district, they can be distributed to the kids that are experiencing homelessness, but that child has to keep their receipt for what they purchase and bring it back to you, and then I will reimburse you for what's on the receipt. So I won't reimburse you for the gift card. The district can buy the gift card, but there's lots of instances where students may be in need of items that they don't want to tell you that they're in need of, like underwear, socks, shoes, and anything that they may not necessarily want to discuss with you, especially in high school. You can give them that gift card you can have your own district agreement with the student that they could sign off on, that they need to return that receipt back to you. And then we will reimburse the district for what's on the receipt, just so long as they are allowable expenses. So there is some risk involved with that, but it may be a good way to give the students some access to be able to spend the money how they want to spend the money for things that they need, and take a little bit off of your plate as far as having to order items or having to find items for them. They can do that themselves with this gift card. So just another option, just something to keep in mind that's out there. But with all gift cards, it's kind of a risky thing, and you're putting all of your faith in the student to bring that receipt forward. So
when you say like the risk is just that they won't bring a receipt back and the district is out that general fund money. It's not, it's so, yeah. So what Rachel's saying is you could buy that with your general fund money. And then if you get a receipt back, then Rachel will process that and refund basically your general fund money. So the risk isn't that somebody would get in trouble because they can't buy those cards, literally won't let them buy alcohol or lottery or firearms or those sorts of things. So the cards just, they won't let them buy it. So really the risk is just that you might not get reimbursed if the kids don't return a receipt.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. So I think that's everything I wanted to cover on this slide. So this next one is the counts that I used for funding. So again, this is $43 per pupil. I used the highest count between the 1920 school year or the 2021 school year. These numbers are what was entered in PowerSchool. So this is coming directly from your district, and just keeping in mind what Dave covered in his portion. This is under identification from what we can tell. And the identification piece is directly tied to our funding. So if we were able to get to that point where we're able to identify students at a greater capacity, just keeping in mind that that's all directly linked to funding. And perhaps next year we might even be able to see double our allocation that we've had this year. So as you can see, counts are going up even despite COVID. So all of the 2021 count was from this last year, when a lot of students were at home and we were still able to identify students. So I think that's great that we were still able to take care of that piece and get students entered into the system, despite a lot of schools being virtual and a lot of schools not having direct contact with families for the most part, as they would be in a normal year. So that's where I got the numbers from, as far as for counts and how that relates to the per pupil allocation. So just, I guess, concluding that part, just look for something from me in the next couple of days. It's going to have your total allocation. Go ahead and spend it. There isn't going to be any carryover. So what you get for this year, work with the students that you have, see what they need, and spend it on them as much as you can. And just keep in mind that all that documentation is going to be required in order for us to be able to reimburse you for those expenses. And then, did I have something else on the agenda?
Sure.
Yeah.
So if I put some of that money into like a transportation account, because that seems to be the biggest, and I've got a couple of transportation issues right now where I'm burning up some of my Title I set aside. I can see me wanting to put some of that money in that fund, and sometimes that, and we use Wesco gas cards as if we use, for part of that. And can that carry over to, if I put them into Wesco gas cards and I keep them with my business manager, and can that carry over to the next year for this, or no?
So it can only be used for stopgap transportation. So it can just be used as a temporary measure to relieve any transportation issues. The funds can be used for gas station or for gas gift cards, but they're generally just allowable if the gift card is only for gas. So I don't know if Wesco does a fuel only gift card. I know Speedway does. And if you purchase those cards, as far as I know, you can hold on to them. So if you wanted to use the funds towards those fuel only cards and have them accessible and then to spend down the money this year, I don't see an issue with that. Dave, do you see any problem with that?
Yeah, I agree. I think that basically it kind of becomes inventory at that part at that point.
Yeah.
You know, I would just like those Walmart cards, you know, didn't allow, you know, like it disallowed those alcohol, tobacco, you know, those sorts of things. That's the thing that you want to make sure with whatever cards you're buying also meet that criteria, and that holds true for the Title I if you're using Title I dollars for that as well. So
Yeah,
that's
this is what we do here. You know, I get a Wesco card and we just write on that. It's got a sticker. You know, we put a sticker and we write
Yep.
gas purchases only, no alcohol sales. So, but the stopgap again. I have one. How do you define that? I'm sorry, I missed part of the first meeting. So first part of the meeting, but stopgap. I'm providing gas cards for a pretty sizable run right now with a parent, and you know it's costing me about $60 a week in gas cards. So you know, for a month now, I've spent about $220, 220, yeah, $240 for a month. We might go another month with this. Is that called stopgap or no?
Yeah, I don't know that we have like a specific time limit, but usually what the gas cards are used for is to say, okay, well, we're trying to figure out how we might be able to arrange bus transportation, you know, to between districts or those sorts of things. Then we can give out the gas cards, but every situation is different. So that, I mean, even coming from out of county and things like that, people have made arrangements to be able to see how they can use different bus systems to get the kids where they're going. But that's like just kind of the main example that I think of. Rachel, I'm not sure if you have another example.
No, yeah. I don't think that there is a specific time limit. I know it's meant to be just a temporary measure. So yeah, if there's a way to work with the students and finding other transportation or.
Right. I mean, it's much cheaper with what I'm doing now, even though that sounds like a lot, than have our bus department make a special route with a special van and a driver. Those costs would be really high. And you know, it's to make because they're like 3 districts away from us. And it was a tough decision for figuring out if it was in the best interest of the child, but we went through the decision maker and we decided to do this because we thought it would be fairly temporary in nature. But, you know, if I went to my bus guy and said, and I did, you know, do you have a solution for me? You know, there's no bus transfers that can be done from 2 or 3 districts away. And so this is the cheapest deal in town for me right now.
Yep.
Yeah.
And David, we can maybe Rachel and I could do some brainstorming with you about that specifically, but I have maybe one other idea that might, but we'll see. You might be right. You know, I'm sure that you guys looked at it and tried to figure out other alternatives, but but maybe Rachel and I can stick around for a minute to hear a little bit more about the situation. So we are just a couple of minutes over time, but Rachel, can you maybe finish up that last piece about closing out the report from last year?
Yeah. So Nicole, who's on the call right now, she's our new liaison with Muskegon Public, and she's been tasked with completing last year's McKinney-Vento report, and she's new, so there's a lot of gaps that will probably be in there that she might have questions on, and this is something that it hasn't been released in MEGS just yet, but I'm thinking that the deadline's probably going to be coming up pretty soon. as far as getting the numbers in from the last year, any activities that took place. So I just wanted to just throw that out there, that she might have some questions for you guys. And if she does, or if you hear from me or her, just to keep that in mind, that to get back on those things as quickly as possible. And we're hoping for next year to be able to look at what data is needed ahead of time, so that we can keep a running list going, either through the data tracker or another way to get that information into the report. But I just wanted to introduce Nicole, and she's got a lot on her plate right now with all of her students, and then this report's coming up too. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that she might be needing some information in the next couple of weeks.
And can I speak for just a second? I know one of the things of information that I will need, I have the number of students for your district, but I'm going to need it by grade level. So I'll be reaching out via email most likely, and just wanted to give you a heads up about that. And if there's anything new or exciting that you did or learned last year, I'd love to hear those stories as well, so I can make sure they're in the report.
Awesome.
Rachel, I have a quick question. Since Early On has never kept track of homeless students before, we are obviously not on the list anywhere, and we cover all the districts. If we have somebody that's identified as homeless and we need some funds for something, do we go to that district that they're in and work with that liaison?
That's a good question. We have some funds through the ISD as well. Dave, what do you think?
My first thought is that is a really great question for us to figure out.
Yeah, you have to think about that.
We get to play newbie this year. Oh, we just took over the grant coordination. We got to look into that.
Yeah, I'll
that's my first thought. Yep.
Okay.
So just want to let everybody off the hook, but just to remind everybody that we do have meetings in January and April, and we are going to do all virtual for the meetings this year. And we didn't really get a chance to kind of have a conversation about some things that we might want to talk more about in January. So in our follow-up email, you might get a follow-up email from me and Rachel. I have, or maybe we'll be able to coordinate and just send one email, but I'd like to send everybody your own specific data that we looked at earlier, when we looked at and we said, hey, there's 1.25% of the Muskegon County, that 1.25% number. I have that broken out for your district and buildings. So I want to send that to you individually. I didn't want to throw that up on the screen or anything like that. So I'd like to send that to everybody individually. Rachel is going to have an estimated amount to send you for your allocation. And if you could reply to those emails or that email with topics that you might like for January, or other support that you can think of that might be helpful, Rachel and I would appreciate that. So with that, we're going to go ahead and stop the recording. And I know that I'm available to stick around, and if anybody has any specific questions.